Moonlight missing in the Phoenix tree. Sarah Lewis married her best friend Chloe Miller's uncle, Robert Miller. She had believed this was a mutual journey of love, only to find a box tucked away in a corner of the study or home office. She unexpectedly discovered that Robert Miller was deeply in love with his non-biological niece, who was her best friend, Chloe Miller, and she was merely a shield against family pressure to settle down. Sarah clutched the box in her hands. Inside were Chloe Miller's old belongings: hair clips, movie ticket stubs, unsent love letters. Each item was dated, tracing a timeline that spanned from before she even met Robert Miller. And even after they were married, there was also a card inside, its contents making her eyes narrow sharply. Chloe, wait for me. As soon as Sarah gives birth to a child, I will divorce her and be with you, regardless of what society says. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness and had to steady herself against the edge of the desk. She remembered her first meeting with Robert Miller. That day, Chloe Miller had said someone invited them to a movie and insisted on dragging her along. Meeting him for the first time, Robert Miller was thoughtful and gentlemanly, and she couldn't help but feel a slight attraction. Though it was only a flicker of interest, what she hadn't expected was that not long after, Robert Miller actually started pursuing her. So they got together, got engaged, and got married. Robert Miller was known for his detached demeanor, but after they married, he treated her very well. Not only that, he consistently wanted to have a child with her. Before, she thought he wanted a child because he loved her and desired a child born of their love, but only now did she realize he wanted a child simply to carry on the family name line. Sarah didn't linger. She stood up and hurried out of the study or home office, rushing downstairs. She needed to find Chloe Miller and ask for an explanation. Perhaps there was some misunderstanding, Sarah tried to convince herself. But what kind of misunderstanding could lead a man to secretly collect ambiguous letters with his niece for 10 years? She was halfway down the stairs when the sounds from the living room froze her in place. Chloe, I've missed you so much. Robert Miller's voice was low and tender, a tone Sarah was familiar with, yet it carried a hint of desire she had never heard before. Uncle Robert, keep your voice down. Sarah's still home. Chloe Miller's gentle voice was completely different from her usual tone. Don't be afraid. She's asleep upstairs. Besides, what if she finds out? She trusts me so much. She believes anything I say. Sarah held her breath, the scene before her stopping her breathing. Chloe Miller and Robert Miller were tangled together on the sofa. Chloe Miller straddling Robert Miller, their clothes disheveled. Stop messing around. Chloe Miller pushed Robert Miller away with a soft laugh. Uncle Robert, just bear with it a little longer. After Sarah has the baby, you'll get divorced, and then we can be together openly. By the way, Uncle Robert, are you sure she'll sign the papers then? Robert Miller's voice suddenly turned cold. She will sign. I have my ways to make her sign. She's too naive. She thinks everyone in the world is as kind as she is. Sarah gripped the stair railing tightly, steadying herself. Speaking of which, how did you convince her to marry you? I just asked you to get close to her. I didn't expect you to actually marry her. Robert Miller scoffed, his voice lazy. It wasn't hard at all. She had just graduated back then, working as a restorer at the museum, as naive as a blank sheet of paper. I took her to a few exhibitions, gave her some old books, and she was incredibly touched. Honestly, I should thank you. If you hadn't introduced us, where would I have found such a perfect baby machine? Chloe Miller leaned into his arms with a coy sound. Well, you're my Uncle Robert. The family wouldn't allow us to be together, so this was the only way. At this point, Chloe Miller suddenly leaned closer to Robert Miller, her voice low, but loud enough for Sarah to hear every single word. How is she in bed? Better than me? Don't even mention it. No one compares to you. If it weren't for the child, I wouldn't even want to touch her. Sarah couldn't listen anymore. She quietly retreated upstairs and softly closed the bedroom door, collapsing onto the floor. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. How ironic. She had considered Chloe Miller her best and most trusted friend, always feeling deeply grateful that Chloe Miller had introduced her to Robert Miller. But she had never imagined that this was all a scam orchestrated by them from beginning to end. She looked at the photo on her vanity. It was a picture of her, Robert Miller, and Chloe Miller together in a coastal resort town like Sunstone Bay. In the photo, Chloe Miller had her arm around Sarah's waist, smiling brightly. Looking back now, during that trip, Robert Miller always seemed to accidentally book the wrong rooms. which resulted in her and Chloe Miller sharing a room, while Robert Miller had one to himself. How many nights, when she thought Chloe Miller was out for a walk, was she actually going to Robert Miller's room? Sarah wiped away her tears, took out her phone, and dialed a number she rarely contacted. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer. Hello. This is Sarah Lewis. I need your assistance regarding a divorce agreement. After hanging up, she opened her laptop and booked a one-way ticket to London. The British Museum's Department of Asian Antiquities had sent her a job offer last week. At the time, she was hesitant because she didn't want to be too far from Robert Miller. Now, thinking back, her past thoughts seemed so ridiculous. This time, she would mend her broken life like restoring a relic. As for the people and things she couldn't take with her, she would let them rot in the past. At 1 in the deep night, the sound of the door opening woke the lightly sleeping Sarah. Hearing footsteps approach, the mattress dipped, and the man's hand rested on her waist. Sarah's body stiffened, but she didn't turn over. Sarah, the man's warm breath brushed against the back of her neck, his hand growing more audacious. Sarah thought of the scene she had witnessed in the living room just a while ago. Robert Miller's touch now filled her with profound disgust. She grabbed his hand, her voice unusually calm. I'm not feeling well. A little uncomfortable. The man's hand paused, then withdrew. Not feeling well? Yeah, in truth, she wasn't having her period. This was just an excuse. But the man never paid attention to any details about her, so he wouldn't know she was lying. Get some rest then, I'll let you off the hook tonight. His words sounded gentle and loving, but in reality, they were laced with endless hypocrisy. After speaking, Robert Miller turned over, his back to her, and soon his breathing became steady. Sarah lay with her eyes open, tears silently falling. She remembered the year she first started working. When she worked late into the night, Robert Miller came to pick her up in the rain, holding the umbrella entirely over her, his own body half soaked. In the back seat of the car, he held her hand and said, from now on, I'll come pick you up every rainy day, okay? Only now did she realize that day was merely because Chloe Miller was interning out of town, and Robert Miller coming to pick her up was just a way to pass the time. Before knowing these things, Sarah had never imagined that her devoted love and marriage were a complete deception from beginning to end, and that the person who had dragged her into the abyss was none other than her most trusted best friend. Fortunately, it wasn't too late. From now on, her life would be free of Chloe Miller and Robert Miller. The next morning, the doorbell rang punctually. Chloe Miller, wearing a pale yellow dress, stood at the door holding a bouquet of lilies, her smile dazzlingly bright. Morning, Sarah. Chloe Miller hugged Sarah tightly and kissed her cheek. Sarah numbly accepted the flowers, her fingertips cold. For the past 3 years, she had thought Chloe Miller remembering her preference for lilies was proof of their deep friendship. Now she understood it was just a prop in their act. Chloe's here. Robert Miller came downstairs, his hair still dripping wet, clearly having just showered, his eyes filled with tenderness the moment he saw Chloe Miller. Uncle Robert. Chloe Miller ran over, affectionately pinching Robert Miller's arm. Long time no see, did you miss me? Robert Miller smiled and ruffled her hair. Of course, they had done this countless times, and Sarah had always thought it was just an elder's affection for a younger relative. Now she saw clearly. The extra few seconds Robert Miller's fingers lingered in Chloe Miller's hair, and the sweet curve of Chloe Miller's lips when she looked up, all revealed that this relationship had long taken root. I'll go arrange the flowers. Sarah turned and headed for the kitchen. The flower stems pricked her palm, but she didn't feel the pain. The faucet ran loudly. Suddenly, a deliberately lowered voice came from behind her, reflected in the kitchen window. She saw Robert Miller embracing Chloe Miller. Chloe, I've missed you so much. Robert Miller's voice was low and hoarse, utterly different from the dismissive tone he used with her last night. Sarah was incredulous. She couldn't believe they would be so brazen, right there in the kitchen, so close to her. They would. Chloe Miller smiled and turned, wrapping her arms around Robert Miller's neck. We just saw each other last night, Emph. Their lips met, and they kissed, oblivious to the world. Sarah stood frozen at the counter, the scissors dropping to the floor. She desperately covered her mouth and nose, stifling any sound. Showing not a trace of her distress, she stayed in the kitchen, giving them ample time for their embrace. When she finally emerged, Chloe Miller's cheeks were flushed, and Robert Miller sat on the sofa with a look of satisfaction, watching Chloe Miller with a warm smile in his eyes. After breakfast, Chloe Miller suddenly asked Sarah, Sarah, Are you going out today? Yes. She planned to go to the British Embassy or consulate to handle her visa application. Where are you going? I'll go with you. Chloe Miller volunteered to accompany her. Sarah didn't hesitate, refusing directly. No need. I'm handling some work matters. It's quite boring. I don't think you'd be interested. But I want to go with you. Chloe Miller pouted. This expression used to seem adorable to Sarah, but now it only filled her with annoyance. Since Chloe wants to, then let's go together. It happens I don't have anything else planned today, Robert Miller spoke, his tone leaving no room for refusal. As they left, Chloe Miller naturally linked her arm through Sarah's left arm, while Robert Miller walked on her right. The September sun was still scorching, making her feel dizzy. Sarah, you don't look well. Are you feeling sick? Chloe Miller asked with concern. I'm fine, Sarah replied casually. The car drove onto the highway. Chloe Miller suddenly clutched her abdomen in pain. Uncle Robert, I'm hurting so much. Robert Miller quickly stopped the car. Where does it hurt? Chloe Miller's face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead. My stomach, it hurts so much. Robert Miller pulled Sarah out of the car without hesitation. Chloe isn't feeling well. Go handle your own matters. I'm taking her to the hospital. Sarah stood in the middle of the road, watching the car speed away. The sun stung her eyes, and her ears were ringing. The traffic light turned from green to red, but she didn't notice. Stepping forward numbly, a screeching brake sounded, and the next second, Sarah's body was hit hard. In that moment, she felt as though something inside her shattered into countless pieces. When she woke again, the pungent smell of disinfectant made Sarah's brow furrow. She tried to move her fingers, and a sharp pain shot through her right arm. You're awake, a voice came from beside her. Sarah lifted her head. A nurse was adjusting the drip speed. You're very lucky. Such a serious car accident, and thankfully you only have a broken right arm and a mild concussion. Sarah remembered the moments before the crash. My phone, did anyone call me? Hearing this, the nurse's expression became somewhat complex. We contacted your family as per protocol, but your husband didn't answer. He replied with a message. We informed him about the accident, but he hasn't come. As the nurse finished speaking, Sarah closed her eyes, her voice weak. I understand. Thank you. After the nurse left, Sarah sat on the hospital bed. A message appeared on her phone. She picked it up and glanced at it. It was from Robert Miller. I'm still at the hospital taking care of Chloe. Won't be back tonight. You don't have to wait up. Sarah didn't reply. She dialed another number. Please help me with the divorce proceedings as quickly as possible. The sooner, the better. After hanging up, Sarah looked out the window, feeling something die within her. Not sadness, not anger, but all the emotions she had held for Robert Miller. Sarah was hospitalized for a few days, and Robert Miller did eventually come. He looked apologetic, holding her hand tightly. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I thought you were just kidding around with me. I didn't expect you to actually get into a car accident. Sarah's gaze was calm, almost icy. Do you think I would joke about something like that? Perhaps it was her cold demeanor, but over the next few days, Robert Miller became exceptionally gentle and attentive. After being discharged and returning home, Robert Miller stood in front of her, holding a bowl of chicken soup, his eyes full of solicitous concern. Thank you. Sarah took the bowl, deliberately avoiding his hand. Robert Miller's gaze lingered on her face. He suddenly reached out and stroked her cheek. You've lost weight. Sarah subtly pulled away. The doctor said I still need rest. Robert Miller gripped her shoulders, his breathing growing heavier. His lips brushed her earlobe. I know. But it's been a long time since I've missed you. His familiar touch had once made Sarah's body go weak, but now it only filled her with immense revulsion and resistance. Chloe. Robert Miller suddenly whispered near her ear, his voice barely audible. Time seemed to freeze. Sarah's body went rigid. She pushed Robert Miller away fiercely, her eyes fixing on his with a cold stare. Robert Miller realized he had called out the wrong name. His face changed instantly. No, I meant. His protests were rushed and flustered. Sarah cut him off, her voice eerily calm. I haven't fully recovered yet, and we have a family dinner or gathering tonight. I need to get ready. Robert Miller stood by the door, watching Sarah disappear from view. A strange emotion suddenly surged in his heart. Not guilt, not annoyance, but a vague sense of unease. It felt as though something was slowly changing, though he couldn't pinpoint what it was. At 7 that evening, Sarah and Robert Miller arrived at the old Miller estate together. As they entered, Everyone turned to look at them. Chloe Miller, in a pale pink dress, stood beside Mrs. Miller, like a beloved Princess Sarah. "You're here. How are you? Feeling better?" "Much better. Thank you, Mom." Sarah smiled in response, her eyes sweeping over the roses in the living room. "Do you like them? I had them specially arranged for you," Robert Miller murmured in her ear. Sarah's fingernails dug into her palms. She was allergic to roses, something she had told Robert Miller in their first year of marriage. "Uncle Robert is so thoughtful. Yesterday I said I didn't like the scent of gardenias, and today he changed everything to roses." Chloe Miller affectionately linked her arm through Robert Miller's. The surrounding relatives exchanged knowing glances, and Robert's older sister even covered her mouth to suppress a laugh. Sarah suddenly realized that in this family, Robert Miller and Chloe Miller's relationship was an open secret, known to everyone. "I'll go help in the kitchen." Sarah pulled her hand away from Robert Miller. In the kitchen, the Miller family members were busy. Just as Sarah picked up a serving dish, Robert's oldest sister quickly took it from her. "An invalid shouldn't be working." Her words sounded caring, but her eyes were full of pity. "That girl Chloe is getting more beautiful by the day," Robert's sister-in-law said as she arranged fruit. "I heard she's very popular overseas, with men lining up to pursue her." "Exactly. If it weren't for," Robert's oldest sister chimed in, then glanced at Sarah standing by the door and abruptly stopped. Sarah pretended not to hear, turning to get wine glasses. The rash on her arm had already spread to her wrist, and her breathing became constricted. She quietly fumbled in her bag for her allergy medication. The bitter taste spread across her tongue, but this bitterness was nothing compared to the pain in her heart. At dinner, Sarah was seated to Robert Miller's left, and Chloe Miller to his right. "I've gathered everyone together today," Mr. Miller began, "first, to celebrate Sarah's recovery, and second, to announce some good news." Sarah noticed Robert Miller suddenly tense, becoming visibly nervous. "Chloe has secured a position with a company abroad. She's leaving next month for 2 years," Mr. Miller announced with a beaming smile. Bang! Robert Miller slammed his wine glass onto the table, his voice trembling with fury. "I don't agree. Who authorized this decision without my input?" The dining room fell silent instantly. Chloe Miller's eyes widened, tears welling up. "Uncle Robert." Robert Miller stood up, hands braced on the table, his gaze icy. "Chloe can't go. She's not well and shouldn't be alone overseas." Sarah sat quietly, watching the anxiety and anguish she had never seen before on her husband's face. It was the first time she had seen him so out of control, and it was all because of Chloe Miller. Mr. Miller's face darkened. "Robert Miller, mind your words. Chloe's future isn't yours alone to decide. Her affairs are my affairs," Robert Miller retorted coldly. For Chloe Miller, he was openly defying Mr. Miller for the first time. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness. She stood up, looking at everyone, her voice light and calm. "Excuse me. I'm not feeling well. I'll take my leave." No one stopped her. Robert Miller didn't even turn around. His entire attention was focused on Chloe Miller, completely oblivious to her. Sarah quickly walked to the restroom. Closing the door, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, and a clear rash had appeared on her neck. She turned on the faucet, letting cold water run over her wrists, but it couldn't wash away the bone-deep chill. "Sarah, are you all right?" Mrs. Miller's voice came from outside the door. Sarah quickly composed her expression and opened the door. "Mom, I'm just a little tired." Mrs. Miller looked her over, then hesitated before speaking. "Don't take what Robert said tonight to heart. He's doted on Chloe like his own niece since she was little, so his reaction was perhaps a bit strong." "I know," Sarah said with a smile. Back in the dining room, the commotion had subsided. Chloe Miller's eyes were red, but a triumphant gleam shone in their corners. Robert Miller sat beside her, whispering something in a tone so gentle it was blinding. "Sarah." Chloe Miller spotted her, her voice sweet. "Come try this cake. Uncle Robert just had someone get it." Sarah looked at the exquisite cake in front of her. "Thank you, but I'm allergic to mango." Robert Miller frowned. "Since when are you allergic to mango?" Sarah looked at him calmly. "I told you in our first year of marriage. It seems you've forgotten." After the dinner, Sarah stood alone on the balcony. Her phone vibrated. It was a call from someone at the British Museum. They had approved her application and asked when she could formally start working. "Next week. I'll be there on time next week. The divorce and visa matters could probably be settled within a week." She hung up the phone. Footsteps sounded behind her. Robert Miller approached, smelling faintly of alcohol. "Where are you going next week?" The sudden question made Sarah flinch. "Nowhere important, just some work matters." Sarah had expected Robert Miller not to press further, but the man looked at her directly. "What work?" Sarah was stumped, unsure what excuse to use. She didn't want Robert Miller to know about her plans to leave just yet. Just then, Chloe Miller's voice came from behind him. "Uncle Robert, I want to go see the fountain over there. Will you come with me?" Of course. Robert Miller agreed without a second thought and left with Chloe Miller. As for the question he had just asked and the strange doubt in his heart, he cast them aside, watching his retreating back. Sarah felt no loss, only a sense of relief and peace. Back home that evening, Sarah took out the document from her bag. The paper was slightly wrinkled from being clutched for too long. The words divorce agreement were stark under the lamplight. She walked to the study or home office door. Her knock was light, but audible to anyone inside. She waited 5 seconds, received no response, and pushed the door open. Robert Miller sat with his back to her at the large office desk. He was on the phone with someone, his long fingers tapping on the keyboard, making a crisp sound. "I'm home. Your period is coming soon. You can't eat ice cream. Be a good girl, Chloe." The man's voice was serious, yet laced with indulgence. Sarah's fingertips trembled slightly. He was so gentle and attentive to Chloe Miller, a sincerity she had never received. She stood quietly at the doorway, waiting for Robert Miller to finish his call. Robert Miller finally turned around, his brow furrowed. "Sarah, when did you come in?" Sarah walked over and placed the document in front of him. "Just now. You need to sign this." Robert Miller didn't even glance at the document. He picked up a fountain pen casually, flipped to the last page, and signed his name. Sarah watched him sign his name with a fluid stroke. Her heart felt as though it was being tightly squeezed by an invisible hand. He hadn't even looked at the content. After 5 years of marriage, was it so insignificant to him? Sarah spoke, her voice unnervingly calm. "Robert Miller." A sudden, urgent phone ring interrupted her. Robert Miller glanced at the screen and immediately answered. His voice instantly softened. "Chloe, don't rush. Take your time, okay? I'll be right there." Hanging up, Robert Miller was already standing, grabbing his suit jacket from the back of the chair. "Chloe's car broke down halfway. I need to go pick her up. Get some rest. Don't wait for me." Sarah stood rooted to the spot, watching him hurry towards the door. Her fingers tightened around the signed divorce agreement, her knuckles white. She suddenly called out to him, "Robert Miller." He turned back, his face etched with impatience. "What is it?" "I'm really in a hurry." Sarah wanted to say so much. She wanted to say that in the past 6 months, he had spent more time accompanying Chloe Miller to the doctor for a cold than he had celebrating her birthday. She wanted to say that last month, when she had a fever of 102 degrees, he was accompanying Chloe Miller to the beach because Chloe Miller said she was feeling down. She wanted to say that last week was their 5th wedding anniversary, but he had forgotten, simply because Chloe Miller was in a bad mood after being scolded by Mr. Miller. But in the end, she just shook her head. "Nothing, go ahead." Watching Robert Miller's back disappear from her sight, Sarah experienced for the first time what it felt like to be too heartbroken to feel grief, too pained to feel anything but numbness. Over the next few days, Sarah was busy preparing for her departure. She folded the last item of clothing and put it in her suitcase. A sudden wave of dizziness made her nearly fall. Regaining her composure, she sat on the chair. This was the 3rd time it had happened today. Her gaze fell on her wedding photo with Robert Miller on the vanity. In the photo frame, she was smiling radiantly. But looking back now, that smile was filled with nothing but ignorance and foolishness. Her hand brushed over her flat abdomen. She suddenly realized something, and her movements froze abruptly. Her period was 2 weeks late. Realizing this, Sarah's face instantly turned ashen. Her periods had always been regular. This had never happened before. She quickly went to the pharmacy in her neighborhood and bought a pregnancy test. Back home, she locked the bathroom door and stared at the 2 lines gradually appearing on the test stick. All Sarah could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart. Her face as white as paper, she gently touched her lower abdomen, unable to imagine that a life was growing there. She was pregnant, with Robert Miller's child. But how could she be pregnant at a time like this? She was ready to divorce Robert Miller and had already planned to leave. Getting pregnant at such a time, she didn't know what to do next. A crushing fear and unease swallowed her. Her phone vibrated. The screen showed an incoming call from Robert Miller. Sarah stared at the name flashing for over 10 seconds before it finally went silent. Then a message popped up. Sarah, I'm working late tonight, won't be back for dinner. Seeing Robert Miller's message again, Sarah could instantly see through the lie. She forced a smile. He had used the same excuse too many times, not even bothering to invent a new one. Late at night, the house was quiet. Sarah curled up on the sofa, browsing posts about single mothers working overseas, her heart wavering. If she kept this child, it meant she would have an unbreakable connection with Robert Miller. Her life would forever be tied to him, but aborting the child, her heart was filled with reluctance. Her parents had passed away early, and she had always been alone. Before she knew about Robert Miller and Chloe Miller, she had always longed for a child, to live a happy life as a family of 3. But Robert Miller had been using and deceiving her from beginning to end. That kind of life would never be possible. At 1 in the morning, the sound of the lock turning woke her from her half-sleep. Robert Miller stumbled in, smelling strongly of alcohol. He dialed a number, his voice thick with drunkenness and a sob. You don't know how much pain I'm in. I only love Chloe. If my father hadn't threatened me with Chloe, why would I ever marry Sarah? Just the thought that the mother of my child is Sarah and not Chloe, it breaks my heart completely. But I have no choice. Only if Sarah has the baby can Chloe and I be together without any qualms. Sarah desperately covered her mouth, preventing any sound from escaping. Her abdomen cramped violently, as if the child inside her had sensed its father's cruel rejection. This conversation showed her Robert Miller's ruthlessness once more, and it solidified her wavering heart at this moment. The next morning, Sarah finished packing and went downstairs, only to find Robert Miller in the living room. The man was seated on the sofa, and in front of him was the pregnancy test she had thrown away in the bathroom last night. Sarah's heart plummeted. She hurried over, looking nervously at Robert Miller. What is this? The man looked at her, his brows tightly furrowed. Sarah tried to calm herself, not letting Robert Miller see any trace of her turmoil. It's my colleagues. She accidentally left it in my bag. It was such a clumsy excuse. Sarah didn't know if Robert Miller would believe it really. Yes, she forced a smile. Hearing her answer, Robert Miller let out a sigh of relief. And this unconscious reaction pierced Sarah's heart deeply once again. He was so against having a child with her. In 5 years of marriage, in his heart, she had always been nothing but a tool. Given that, what reason did she have to hesitate? After breakfast, Sarah picked up her bag, ready to leave. Robert Miller, who usually paid her no mind, suddenly asked, Are you going out? Yes. Where are you going? To get coffee with a friend. Robert Miller stared intently into her eyes. I'll take you. With that, he stood up, but Sarah refused. No need, I'll go by myself. After saying that, she turned and left. Robert Miller stood rooted to the spot, watching her retreating back. He felt as though something was different, but what it was, he couldn't quite explain. At 3 in the afternoon, Sarah stood outside a women's clinic, clutching an appointment slip. A nurse gently called her name, Mrs. Lewis. You can come in now. In the consultation room, the doctor asked the routine questions. When was your last period? Are you sure you don't want this child? Is anyone accompanying you? Sarah answered mechanically, her eyes fixed on the blurry speck on the ultrasound screen. That was her child with Robert Miller, a life destined not to be born. Would you like to see? The doctor turned the screen towards her. Sarah shook her head, then changed her mind at the last moment. She stared intensely at the screen, her eyes stinging. Doctor, can I have a photo? The doctor sighed. Since it wasn't meant to be, don't blame yourself too much. You have the right to choose whether to give birth to him. Sarah looked away, tears still falling uncontrollably. The procedure was quick, almost painless, only a deep sense of emptiness spreading from her uterus throughout her body. Sarah lay in the recovery room, her gaze fixed on the black and white ultrasound photo, her heart aching to the point of numbness. Returning home that evening, Robert Miller wasn't there. The house was eerily silent. Sarah walked to the study or home office and took down the box from the top shelf of the bookshelf. She placed today's ultrasound photo inside the box Robert Miller cherished, closed the lid, and put the box back in its place. As she left the study or home office, a notification text message arrived on her phone, confirming her visa application had been processed. Sarah opened an app and booked a flight departing the following afternoon at 5 o'clock. The next morning, Sarah finished packing and closed her suitcase. A sudden sound came from the doorway, and the next second Robert Miller burst in. Sarah instinctively hid the suitcase behind her, But she hadn't expected Robert Miller to pay no mind to her luggage at all. He frantically grabbed her shoulders, his voice filled with an urgency she had never heard before. "Sarah, I'm so glad you're home." Sarah looked at him, confused, not understanding why he was so agitated. "Chloe got into a car accident and needs Rh negative blood. Only you can." The dim light in the entryway illuminated Robert Miller's face, highlighting his pallor. The man's words were unfinished, but the meaning was clear. He wanted her to donate blood to Chloe Miller. Sarah thought of herself lying on the operating table yesterday, completely alone. She thought of the ultrasound photo and Robert Miller's drunken words. Pain spread from her heart throughout her body. Sarah had only one thought: she wouldn't give blood to Chloe Miller. "I don't want to give her blood." Without hesitation, Sarah refused, her voice unnaturally calm. Robert Miller's eyes widened in surprise. He likely hadn't expected her to refuse. "Chloe is your best friend, how can you?" "I just don't want to." If Chloe Miller truly considered her a best friend, she wouldn't have used her to conceal her relationship with Robert Miller, wouldn't have tricked her into marrying him, and wouldn't have treated her like a fool all this time. Sarah dragged her suitcase towards the door, preparing to leave. Robert Miller looked at her coldly. The next second, he forcefully grabbed her hand. Sarah struggled desperately. "Robert Miller, I said I don't want to. Let go of me. No matter what. You will give Chloe blood today, Sarah. You don't have the option to refuse." Despite Sarah's pleas and struggles, Robert Miller forcibly took her to the hospital. Finally, Sarah was pinned down in the blood donation room, giving blood for Chloe Miller. As the nurse inserted the needle, she asked curiously, "That gentleman has been crying outside the ICU." Holding that young lady's hand, "It's truly touching." The nurse suddenly asked her, "What's your relationship with that gentleman?" Sarah's face was pale. "We have no relationship at all." A wave of dizziness hit her as the needle was withdrawn. Sarah leaned against the wall, and the nurse asked with concern, "Should I call that gentleman over?" "You look very pale." Sarah slowly stood up. A sharp pain suddenly twisted in her abdomen. Her body, not fully recovered from the procedure, was nearly depleted by the 400 cc's of blood drawn down the corridor. Robert Miller's voice was faintly audible. "It's done, don't worry. She has plenty of blood. She'll be fine." Sarah froze, those words stabbing into her chest like knives. She had thought she couldn't feel anything anymore, but at this moment, the ache in her heart was painfully real. She turned and walked out of the hospital, back home. She placed the divorce agreement and the wedding ring from her ring finger on the table. Picking up her suitcase, she went to the door, took out her phone, removed the SIM card, and threw it away along with the contact list containing Robert Miller's number. On the way to the airport by taxi, the rain stopped. Upon reaching the airport, checking in, everything went smoothly. As the plane climbed, Sarah looked out at the city shrinking below. Leaning against the window, she slowly closed her eyes. In her dream, she felt lighter than ever before, and from today onwards, Robert Miller would completely disappear from her world. In the hospital ICU, Chloe Miller's face was pale, but her breathing had stabilized. The doctor said the most critical period was over. Thanks to the timely blood transfusion, Robert Miller rubbed his temples, his gaze on Chloe Miller's face, but in his mind's eye, he saw Sarah's tightly pressed lips and slightly trembling eyelashes as she gave blood. In the past few years of their marriage, Sarah had never been in very good health, having so much blood drawn so suddenly. He wondered how she was doing. Thinking this, Robert Miller abruptly stood up. Chloe Miller weakly opened her eyes and looked at him. "Uncle Robert." Robert Miller managed a smile and gently stroked her hair. "It's nothing, I'll get you some water. You rest well. Then come back quickly, Uncle Robert. I'm scared alone." Leaving the room, Robert Miller hurried towards the blood donation room, his heart inexplicably racing. The door to the blood donation room was half open. It was empty inside. A nurse pushing a medication cart passed by and asked him, puzzled, "Are you looking for someone?" Robert Miller nodded, pointing inside. "The lady who donated blood here just now, the one with the very pale face." The nurse frowned and thought, "Oh, her. She left half an hour ago. She was walking a bit unsteadily, not looking very well. I suggested she rest for a while, but she insisted on leaving." After the nurse left, Robert Miller took out his phone. His thumb hovered over Sarah's number. The time on the screen showed to 30 am. Would it be inappropriate to call at this hour? Just as he hesitated, hurried footsteps sounded behind him. A nurse rushed up, "Mr. Miller, your niece is awake and says she's feeling chest tightness. You should go back." Hearing this, Robert Miller didn't delay, turning to follow the doctor. He told himself that Sarah had always been strong, and she must have taken a taxi home by now. He could contact her tomorrow. It wouldn't be too late. She had given blood today and needed rest. Calling her at this time would only disturb her. At 8 in the evening the next day, Chloe Miller's condition finally improved. Robert Miller stood by the window in the hospital corridor, took out his phone. Sarah hadn't sent any messages since last night. This was very unlike her. Even when their relationship was at its most strained, Sarah would maintain basic contact when necessary. The wait before the call connected felt exceptionally long this time, however. The sound from the receiver wasn't Sarah's calm voice, but a mechanical female voice. "The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again." Robert Miller froze, his fingers stiff. He redialed the number, the same message repeated, cold as a final judgment. "Impossible," he murmured, quickly searching for another number in his contact list. Sarah's colleague at the museum. The call was answered. The other person asked, puzzled, "Mr. Miller? Why are you calling so suddenly?" "I can't reach Sarah." "Is she at the museum?" "Sarah? She submitted her resignation 2 weeks ago and has left." "You didn't know?" The colleague's words made Robert Miller's body stiffen, his fingers gripping the phone tightly. After hanging up, an unprecedented fear gripped his heart. He rushed into the hospital room and grabbed his coat. "Chloe, I need to go home for a bit." "What's wrong?" "Sarah's number is out of service. Something isn't right." Chloe Miller said carelessly. "Maybe she just changed her number. We can talk about it tomorrow." "Uncle Robert, I want you to stay with me." With that, Chloe Miller took his hand, her small face nuzzling the back of his hand. Robert Miller had always found it hard to resist Chloe Miller's coaxing. "All right," he compromised, "I'll stay and keep you company." And so, Robert Miller stayed at the hospital all night again. It wasn't until the next morning that he returned home. The door opened. The house was empty. "Sarah?" His voice echoed in the vacant living room, receiving no response. Robert Miller searched room by room. The master bedroom closet door was open. Sarah's side was almost empty. Only a few out-of-season clothes hung forlornly. All her skincare products and jewelry were gone from the vanity. The phone in the living room suddenly rang. Robert Miller almost ran back to the living room. He picked up the phone. The screen showed an unknown number. "Hello, Sarah?" he asked urgently. A professional female voice answered. "Hello. This is the City Hall Marriage Bureau. We are conducting a follow-up on divorce cases. Regarding your divorce proceedings with Mrs. Sarah Lewis, do either party have any objections regarding the property division?" Robert Miller's blood ran cold instantly. "What divorce proceedings?" "Our system indicates that you and Mrs. Sarah Lewis processed your divorce last Wednesday." Mrs. Lewis submitted the original signed and stamped agreement stating she voluntarily waived all joint property. The phone slipped from Robert Miller's hand, falling to the floor. On the phone, the staff member was still patiently confirming. "Your ID number ends in 321, is that correct?" Mrs. Lewis provided the original agreement signed and stamped by both parties. The original agreement? Robert Miller remembered that day in the study or home office. Sarah had indeed given him a document. At the time, his mind was entirely on Chloe Miller, and he thought it was just a regular document. He hadn't even looked at the content before signing it. Thinking this, Robert Miller rushed into the study or home office. The document on the desk was long gone, but in the center was a box he knew all too well, containing all his memories with Chloe Miller. He opened the box. Before, it was filled with records about Chloe Miller. But now next to them was a brand new ultrasound photo. It was Sarah's. Robert Miller collapsed onto the chair, his hands trembling as he held the ultrasound photo. Memory fragments surged like a tide. Sarah's pale face, her recent strangeness, her calm, almost indifferent attitude. All the clues connected to form a clear trajectory, pointing to a truth he was unwilling to see. Sarah knew everything about him and Chloe Miller, and that's why she left. The box on the desk lay open quietly, the items neatly arranged. The visual impact relentlessly struck Robert Miller's mind, signifying all his lies and betrayals. Robert Miller didn't know when Sarah had found out the truth. Since the day he drunkenly called out Chloe Miller's name, or even earlier, he suddenly remembered what he had said to Chloe Miller. "Sarah is very naive. She'll believe anything I say." But only now did he understand that it wasn't naivety, but her love for him. When he had squandered that love completely, Sarah left resolutely and thoroughly, without even leaving him a chance for a proper goodbye. Thinking this, Robert Miller felt as if something had struck him in the heart, a dull ache spreading, but soon, he understood a simple truth. He had married Sarah simply to pave the way for his relationship with Chloe Miller, which wasn't blessed. Now that Sarah was gone, he should put all his focus back on Chloe Miller. As for his marriage to Sarah, he told himself it was in the past. Time quickly came for Chloe Miller's discharge from the hospital. The old Miller estate specifically prepared a dinner to celebrate her recovery. Robert Miller sat in the living room and suddenly thought of the last family dinner gathering. Sarah was there then. Uncle Robert, what are you daydreaming about? Chloe Miller, having just recovered, walked over in a pale pink dress, her smile radiant. Robert Miller snapped out of his thoughts and turned his gaze to Chloe Miller. Under the gaze of the entire family, Robert Miller looked into her eyes, then suddenly took her hand. The laughter and chatter in the living room stopped instantly. Everyone looked at them. Robert Miller opened a ring box and spoke with sincerity and fervor. Chloe, marry me. Instantly, the faces of all the Miller family members changed. Chloe Miller's smile froze on her face. She quickly glanced at her stunned family members, then looked behind Robert Miller. Mr. Miller's face was ashen. Uncle Robert, you're not serious, Chloe Miller said, her face pale, her voice barely audible. I am serious. Robert Miller held her hand tightly, pulling her behind him. He looked at Mr. Miller, his voice firm. Dad, I want to marry Chloe. I hope you can give us your blessing. Nonsense, Mr. Miller roared in rebuke. I'm not talking nonsense. Do you know what you're saying? What about Sarah? Aren't you ashamed to say such things as a married man? To be honest, Sarah and I are already divorced. It's been about a month now. Robert Miller stated the news of his divorce from Sarah flatly. What, you're divorced from Sarah? Yes, Robert. When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us about something so important? The Miller family members spoke one after another, all shocked by his divorce from Sarah. Hearing this news, Mr. Miller was even more furious. What did you say? You and Sarah are divorced? Yes, we're divorced. I think you've truly gone mad, Robert Miller. Marriage is no child's play. Is this how you treat Sarah? I never loved Sarah at all. You just divorced Sarah and now you're publicly proposing to your nominal niece? You've brought shame upon the Miller name. Robert Miller calmly stated what he believed to be the truth. Sarah is in the past. I love Chloe, and I always have. Chloe Miller lightly tugged at his sleeve behind him. Robert Miller thought she was frightened and held her hand even more firmly. Mr. Miller strode over, his voice low, looking at Robert Miller, his face full of anger. Are you crazy? She's your brother's daughter. Robert Miller met his gaze without fear. We have no blood relation. You've always known my feelings for Chloe. Mr. Miller slammed his hand on the table. That was just impulsive emotion. I tolerated your foolishness all these years thinking you would eventually come to your senses. Now stop this charade immediately. Robert Miller lowered his head, silent for a moment. When he looked up again, his eyes were even more resolute than before. I said, I want to marry her. What if I forbid it? Mr. Miller's cold face showed no hint of warmth. Robert Miller's eyes darkened as he stared at Mr. Miller. When he spoke again, his voice was full of coldness. If the Miller family is unwilling to accept Chloe, then I can cease to be a Miller. The entire living room fell into a dead silence. Mr. Miller's face turned from green to pale, finally settling into a terrifyingly deep expression. Very well, from today onwards, you are no longer my son. Miller Corporation, the family trust, all funds are nothing to do with you. Hearing this, Chloe Miller's eyes widened instantly, and she gasped, Uncle Robert, don't. Robert Miller laughed coldly. Is that so? It doesn't matter for her. I can give up everything. With that, he pulled Chloe Miller and walked past everyone. Behind them, Mrs. Miller's cries and the sound of shattering porcelain could be heard. He ignored it all. It wasn't until they were in the car that Chloe Miller seemed to come alive, speaking with an urgency she had never shown before. Uncle Robert, you were too impulsive just now. Actually, Chloe Miller's words were cut off by Robert Miller. I have never been clearer. With that, he started the car and drove away from the old Miller estate. Chloe Miller looked at his profile, biting her lower lip fiercely. After leaving the Miller estate, Robert Miller and Chloe Miller temporarily stayed in a small apartment he owned, the only property Mr. Miller hadn't confiscated. That evening, Chloe Miller tugged at his arm, still struggling to accept the situation. Uncle Robert, Are you really sure about this? Giving up everything from the Miller family? Robert Miller held her from behind, his voice gentle. As long as I have you, I can give up anything. Chloe Miller didn't speak, just let him hold her, but a hint of hesitation clearly flickered in her eyes. On his first day of work, Robert Miller ran into a former business partner who looked at him with pity. Why bother for a woman? Robert Miller smiled and didn't say anything. In his eyes, it was all worth it. Their many years of shared feelings, even if he lost everything. As long as he had Chloe Miller by his side, nothing else mattered. Robert Miller returned home after a busy day. Chloe Miller was trying on a new dress. Seeing him back, Chloe Miller twirled and asked with a slight smile, "Uncle Robert, how does it look?" It was only 38,000 after the discount. Robert Miller thought of the four-figure balance in his bank account and said tactfully, "It's beautiful. But we need to be more thrifty now." Chloe Miller pouted. "Thrifty about what? A bracelet you bought me before cost more than that." "Chloe, things are different now." Chloe Miller walked over and hugged his arm, then suddenly said, "Uncle Robert, why don't you go home and apologize to Grandpa? I believe he enough." Before Chloe Miller could finish, Robert Miller cut her off with a cold voice. "I said I was willing to cut ties with the Miller family for you." His attitude was too firm. Chloe Miller looked at him cautiously and said no more. There was no follow-up to that conversation, but from then on, Chloe Miller's complaints increased daily. The apartment was too small. They didn't have a housekeeper. She couldn't afford new handbags. One conflict after another eroded their feelings and patience. One late night, Chloe Miller suddenly said, "Uncle Robert, Grandpa contacted me." Robert Miller looked up at her. "What did he say?" Chloe Miller hesitated before speaking. "He said he could send me abroad for further studies." Robert Miller looked up, his eyes deep. "Do you want to go?" "It's a good opportunity. I can go first. And when I'm settled, you can." "Chloe, do you know what going abroad means right now? Didn't we agree to get married next year?" Chloe Miller's expression froze for a moment. "Getting married isn't urgent. Robert Miller didn't speak further, his eyes as cold as ice. Chloe Miller also stopped talking. After that day, it felt like there was an invisible barrier between them. A week later, Robert Miller accidentally saw Chloe Miller's computer screen. The email page displayed an acceptance letter from London College of Arts for a fashion management program. With enrollment in 2 weeks, a sound came from the door. It was Chloe Miller, back from shopping. Seeing Robert Miller standing by her computer, his face grim, she froze. "Uncle Robert, why are you back so early?" Robert Miller pointed at the screen, his voice colder than ever. "Explain this." Chloe Miller nervously clasped her hands together. I just applied casually. I didn't expect. Did my father arrange this?" "When is the flight?" Robert Miller pressed on. Not believing a word she said, "Uncle Robert, listen to me." Chloe Miller panicked. She rushed over and grabbed his hand, explaining incoherently, "I'm just going to study. I'm not coming back. We can have a long-distance relationship." "A long-distance relationship? I gave up everything for you, and you choose to leave me again?" "Chloe, do you really love me?" Robert Miller's eyes were cold. Chloe Miller didn't hesitate. "I love you." But Robert Miller shook his head. He peeled her hand off his arm. "No, you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't go abroad, and you wouldn't completely disregard my feelings." Chloe Miller looked at him pleadingly, but received only his coldness and indifference. She stopped pretending. "Yes, I'm going abroad. I'm tired of living like this, in poverty." "Poverty?" Robert Miller scoffed. "When have I ever mistreated you?" "You haven't mistreated me, but this isn't what I want, Uncle Robert. I just don't understand why you had to be so public. Why you had to get married. Why did you have to upset Grandpa? We could have been like before, when Sarah was still around. You could have married and had children, and we could still have been together secretly. Wouldn't that have been better?" Robert Miller looked at the girl he had loved for 10 years and suddenly felt a ridiculous sense of unfamiliarity. He turned around, his back to Chloe Miller. "Go. I'll pack your things tomorrow." Seeing his cold attitude, Chloe Miller changed her tone again, her voice softening. "Uncle Robert, I didn't mean that." This time, Robert Miller roared angrily. "I said, go." Chloe Miller looked at his back, bit her lip, and finally chose to leave. The next morning, Robert Miller woke up to a nearly silent apartment. A note from Chloe Miller was on the bedside table. "Uncle Robert, I've moved to a hotel. My flight is next Wednesday. I hope you can come see me off." Robert Miller glanced at it, crumpled the note, and threw it in the trash can. He didn't go to work. Sitting alone on the bedroom carpet, he pulled open the bedside drawer and took out a velvet box. Inside was the wedding ring Sarah had left behind. The engraving inside the ring was slightly blurred, but their wedding date was still discernible. Robert Miller remembered the day he proposed. Sarah had cried like a child, saying it was the happiest day of her life. And what had he given her? Years of deception, a child forced to be aborted, and a departure filled with scars. Robert Miller clenched the wedding ring, it digging deeply into his palm. The day Chloe Miller left, Robert Miller didn't go to see her off. He returned to the Miller estate and sincerely apologized to Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller looked at him coldly and said, "Now do you know how wrong you were? It's a shame about Sarah. You didn't deserve her." Hearing those words, a pang shot through Robert Miller's heart. After that day, he instructed his assistant, find Sarah Lewis, at any cost. Meanwhile, in the restoration lab or workshop at the British Museum, Martha knocked on the open door and said with a smile, "Sarah, take a break. You've been working for 6 hours without moving." Sarah looked up and blinked her tired eyes, her expression gentle. "Almost done, just a few more strokes." Martha shook her head helplessly, closed the door, and gave her ample space. Her colleagues at the museum all liked the restorer from China. She was quiet and professional, with incredible patience for the most fragile artifacts. Sarah came out of the restoration lab or workshop. Martha handed her a paper bag. "Oh, Ms. Hayes dropped this off. She said it's a birthday gift from her and her brother." Sarah was taken aback. She had completely forgotten it was her birthday today. She opened the paper bag. Inside was a restoration tool. "Wow. This isn't cheap. Ms. Hayes and her brother are really thoughtful," Martha said with a smile. Sarah smiled gently in return. "Yes, she's my best friend." The Ms. Hayes Martha mentioned was Emily Hayes. Emily Hayes was her university classmate and now worked at an auction house, since they ran into each other at the museum 6 months ago. This enthusiastic girl had forced her way into Sarah's life, weekly coffee or tea sessions, invitations to various exhibitions, and she even came to Sarah's apartment to personally take care of her when she had a cold. As for Emily Hayes's brother, he was a well-known venture capitalist. Sarah's mind conjured up his image, 6'1", a pair of deep, dark eyes, a distinguished demeanor, emanating an aura that warned others to keep their distance. Her interactions with David Hayes weren't extensive. They would just nod and smile whenever they met. But even a man she had limited contact with, just like Emily Hayes, had been very supportive of her when she first arrived in the UK. At the end of the workday, as Sarah walked out of the British Museum, she saw Emily Hayes waving from a distance. Sarah was quite surprised. She had assumed that after delivering the gift, they wouldn't see each other again today. As she approached, Emily Hayes hugged her tightly. "Happy birthday." "Thank you." Emily Hayes linked her arm through Sarah's, grinning widely. "My brother's waiting for us in the car. There's a surprise tonight." "A surprise?" Sarah's eyes widened with curiosity. Emily Hayes leaned in mysteriously and whispered in her ear, "You'll find out later." After getting into the car, David Hayes, who was in the driver's seat, turned around and simply said, "Happy birthday." The car started. Sarah pursed her lips and began, "You didn't have to." Before she could finish, Emily Hayes interrupted her. "Stop talking nonsense. Today you have to do as we say. First we're going to dinner, then back home to open presents." The car stopped in front of a nice restaurant. The owner, a woman, greeted the siblings warmly, as if they were old friends. Her gaze lingered on Sarah for a few seconds, a knowing smile in her eyes. Emily Hayes leaned close to her ear and whispered, "My brother booked this 2 weeks in advance. Their place is incredibly popular. The owner usually doesn't take walk-ins." The food arrived quickly. A classic comfort food dish. A classic comfort food dish. All authentic classic comfort food. Sarah tasted each dish. The taste of home warmed her heart. "How is it? Is it good?" David Hayes asked. Sarah nodded, afraid to speak, fearing her voice would tremble. She remembered her last birthday, when Robert Miller was coincidentally on a business trip and only sent a text message, and yet, this pair of siblings she had only recently met remembered her casually mentioning comfort food, and had gone to such lengths to prepare a special birthday for her. Sarah enjoyed the meal, feeling both happy and touched. After dinner, the car drove to an apartment building. "What is this?" Sarah looked at them, puzzled. "You said we were going home? Why did we come here?" Emily Hayes smiled, finally revealing the secret. "Sarah, this is your new home. My brother found it for you." It's very clean, in a great location, and most importantly, it gets a lot of sunlight. Sarah looked at David Hayes, incredulous. The basement apartment she was currently living in was dark and damp, but she had never complained. How had David Hayes noticed? Moreover, how long had he been looking for a new place for her? Let's go. Let's take a look inside. David Hayes looked up, his eyes meeting hers for a few seconds before he looked away. Okay. Emily Hayes linked arms with Sarah, and David Hayes led them into the apartment. Opening the apartment door and seeing the fully furnished interior, Sarah was surprised again. She turned to David Hayes. Such a nice place. The rent must be very high, right? The landlord is my friend. The rent is the same as your current place. Most of the furniture is unused from my studio. Emily Hayes exposed his lie. Brother's lying. You personally oversaw all this furniture, spent a month on it, and before Emily Hayes could finish, she was stopped by a warning look from David Hayes. She cheekily stuck out her tongue. Sarah understood everything. She turned back to David Hayes and thanked him sincerely. Thank you, David. That night, David Hayes and Emily Hayes stayed with her until late before leaving. Before going to sleep, her phone rang again. She received a message from David Hayes. Want to go to the museum together tomorrow? Are you free? Yes. See you tomorrow then? Okay. See you tomorrow. Good night. These simple messages made Sarah's lips curve into an involuntary smile. She thought of a description she had seen in a drama once. David Hayes, like a kind-hearted deity, outwardly cold and unapproachable, but with an incredibly soft heart. Meanwhile, Robert Miller finally found Sarah Lewis's entry and exit records. The next morning, Sarah and David Hayes went to the museum together. Have some water. David Hayes handed her a bottle of water, his voice gentle. Sarah turned her head to look at him. David Hayes was wearing a suit today, a rare sight. He noticed her gaze, cleared his throat lightly, and maintained a comfortable distance. It gave her a complete sense of security. Thank you, Sarah said softly. What made you think of asking me to the museum? Emily said you were interested in the museums here but hadn't found the right opportunity to go. Sarah hadn't expected Emily Hayes to tell David Hayes about these small things, and she was even more surprised that David Hayes had remembered them. They reached a coffee shop. David Hayes suddenly said, "Let's take a break." They sat opposite each other. David Hayes suddenly took out a jewelry box and pushed it towards her. What is this? Open it and see. Sarah opened it. Inside the box was a bookmark. Engraved on the back was a small line of text. Nice to meet you, Sarah Lewis. Sarah looked up at David Hayes. Since she came to the UK, Emily Hayes's daily coffee or tea invitations, and David Hayes's perfectly timed pickups when he happened to be passing by. She had always thought it was out of pity, but now she understood. There was a deeper meaning in it that she hadn't noticed before. David Hayes gazed at her quietly, his eyes open and honest. I know about you and Robert Miller. Sarah's fingers clenched suddenly. That name could still stir her emotions no matter when it was mentioned. David Hayes spoke again, explaining his words. I'm not asking questions. I just want to tell you that I've seen many sides of you, and I know your past. I like you. Not just the person you are now, but also everything that makes up your past. The sudden confession made Sarah incredibly flustered. She looked at David Hayes. His eyes were full of sincerity. Her past experiences made it difficult for her to open her heart again, but she couldn't bear to refuse him. I need time, was the only answer she could give. David Hayes seemed to sigh with relief, showing no trace of displeasure. If I'm not mistaken, does that mean you're willing to give me a chance? It's okay. Take your time thinking. I have plenty of patience. 1 year, 10 years. As long as you allow me to wait by your side. Leaving the museum, Sarah's mind was more chaotic than when she arrived. David Hayes's confession was like a stone thrown into the lake of her heart, which she had struggled to calm, creating countless ripples. She mechanically followed him towards the parking lot, not noticing the edge of the step. Her foot caught, and she nearly fell. Fortunately, David Hayes quickly wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her into his embrace and preventing her fall. They were very close. Sarah's face pressed against his chest. David Hayes's voice sounded from above, filled with concern. Are you all right? Just as Sarah was about to answer, a familiar male voice suddenly rang out. Sarah Lewis. That voice made Sarah's body instantly stiffen. After a long pause, she slowly turned her head and saw Robert Miller standing not far away, dragging a carry-on suitcase. He had clearly come straight from the airport. He quickly walked over, pointing at David Hayes. his voice low and cold with anger. Who is he? Sarah felt David Hayes's arms still firmly around her, not loosening because of Robert Miller's appearance, nor tightening deliberately. Sarah finally regained her composure. She stood straight, her gaze fixed on Robert Miller, her voice surprisingly calm and indifferent. Mr. Miller, we've been divorced for a long time. This is my business, and it has nothing to do with you. Before seeing Sarah, Robert Miller had imagined countless possibilities for their reunion. He thought there might be blame, resentment, tears of sadness, but he had never imagined Sarah would be so cold to him. They were married once. Was he the only one still dwelling on the past relationship, unable to let go? Sarah. Robert Miller looked at her in disbelief. Do you know what you're saying? I know perfectly well. I'll ask you again. Who is he? Then I'll tell you again. It has nothing to do with you. Sarah spoke each word distinctly. 6 months ago, Robert Miller had abandoned her multiple times for Chloe Miller, even deceiving and using her from beginning to end. His current appearance, burning with jealousy, was simply absurdly comical. David Hayes spoke at this moment. Let's go. Sarah nodded, okay. As she turned to leave, Robert Miller suddenly grabbed her wrist. You can't go. David Hayes looked at Robert Miller. Please control yourself, sir. Robert Miller looked at the unfamiliar man in front of him. In the other man's eyes, he saw a terrifying calmness. This look made him release his grip involuntarily. Taking advantage of the moment, Sarah and David Hayes quickly left. On the way home, thinking of the painful memories, Sarah bit her lower lip fiercely, trying to keep her tears from falling. David Hayes waited quietly. Only when her breathing was steadier did he speak. Do you want to go home or somewhere else? Let's go home, Sarah said, then changed her mind. Actually, let's go to the museum. I still have work to do. David Hayes shook his head. You should rest today. I'll take you home. Sarah didn't say anything further. David Hayes was right. In her current state, she wouldn't be able to work at the museum. When they reached her apartment building, David Hayes insisted on accompanying her upstairs in the elevator. Sarah stared at the changing floor numbers and suddenly asked, why me? David Hayes thought for a moment before answering. Remember that artifact restoration competition you participated in during university? You stayed up for 3 days straight for a broken piece of porcelain. At the time, I thought that a girl who treated broken things so gently must have a resilience that most people don't. Sarah's eyes widened. She had no idea that David Hayes had seen her so long ago. Upon reaching the apartment, Sarah expected David Hayes to leave, but he stood by the door. I'll be right outside the door. Call me anytime if you need anything. You don't have to. I need to. David Hayes's eyes were firm. Not to watch over you, just in case. Sarah understood he meant Robert Miller might show up. She wanted to say she wasn't a helpless person who needed protecting, but exhaustion suddenly washed over her. She suddenly wanted David Hayes to stay. That night, Sarah didn't sleep at all. Robert Miller's sudden appearance had reopened the wound she thought had healed, and David Hayes's confession plunged her into new fear. Did she have the courage to love again? If she did, would she repeat the same mistakes, plunging herself into the abyss once more? The next morning, Sarah opened the door. David Hayes woke up instantly, nearly stumbling as he stood up, his leg having gone numb. But he paid no mind to himself, his eyes solely on Sarah. How are you? Did you sleep well last night? Seeing his weary appearance, Sarah's heart softened considerably. She spoke first, her voice gentle. Come in, I'll make you breakfast. A hint of surprise flashed in David Hayes's eyes. But he didn't rush in. Is that okay? Sarah nodded. She gathered her courage and, for the first time, initiated a hug with David Hayes. Thank you. Thank you for giving me time. They didn't notice the taxi parked downstairs. Robert Miller sat inside, watching the two figures embracing upstairs through the car window. In just 6 months, Robert Miller couldn't accept that Sarah had started a new life during this time, and that she now had another man by her side. But Sarah loved him so much before. No matter how much he ignored her, she never got angry with him. This time, it must be because he went too far, made her too angry, and that's why she wanted to use this method to get back at him. She must still love him deep down. As long as he coaxed her, she would definitely come back to him. Thinking this, Robert Miller started the car and drove away. He needed to plan carefully how to win Sarah back in the shortest possible time. After that day, Sarah Lewis and David Hayes's relationship developed further. They often went to work and home together and ate dinner with Emily Hayes. With opportunities deliberately created by Emily Hayes, the two of them confirmed their relationship and began dating. During this time, Robert Miller came to find Sarah Lewis every day. One day, it was raining heavily. Sarah Lewis walked out of the British Museum. David Hayes couldn't pick her up because he was on an urgent business trip. Just as she opened her umbrella, she suddenly felt a gaze. In the distance, Robert Miller stood there. He didn't have an umbrella. Amidst the stream of people, his behavior was strange, like a ridiculous clown. His gray trench coat was soaked through, and he looked completely disheveled. Sarah Lewis only glanced at him before looking away. Noticing her turning to leave, Robert Miller immediately ran after her. His voice was sincere, almost pleading, "Sarah, can we talk, please?" Sarah Lewis didn't stop, quickening her pace. She didn't think they had anything left to talk about. She had made everything clear during their last reunion, back home. It was almost 10 o'clock. Sarah Lewis brewed a cup of ginger tea to ward off the cold. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and pulled back a corner of the curtain. She saw Robert Miller standing below, directly opposite her window. The rain had soaked him through, his hair plastered to his forehead, his lips frozen white. Her phone screen lit up. Sarah Lewis glanced at it. It was a text message from Robert Miller. "I know you can see me. I'll wait until you're willing to see me." Seeing this message, Sarah Lewis unconsciously tightened her grip on her phone. Robert Miller was still the same as before, only considering himself, completely disregarding others' feelings. If he wanted to stand in the rain, he could. Sarah Lewis closed the curtains, turned on the television, and turned up the volume loud enough to drown out the sound of the rain. Late at night, Sarah Lewis was startled awake. The rain was still falling, even harder now. She walked to the window again and pulled back the curtain. Robert Miller was still there. This sight should have softened her heart. After all, Robert Miller's single frown used to make her abandon all her principles. But now, Sarah Lewis only felt a sense of irony. All she could think of was how she had been deceived and neglected before, lying alone on the operating table, crying, and ruthlessly aborting her child. Compared to her, what was Robert Miller enduring now? She sent a picture of Robert Miller to David Hayes. David Hayes's reply came quickly. "I'll send Emily to pick you up." Sarah Lewis replied, "No need to bother. He'll leave eventually." David Hayes was still worried and kept chatting with her, not hanging up the phone all night. At 6 in the morning, the rain stopped. Sarah Lewis made breakfast and looked out the window again. Robert Miller was finally gone, leaving only a puddle of water on the ground. She sighed with relief. When the doorbell rang, Sarah Lewis opened the door, only to see Robert Miller, completely soaked through. Once again, Robert Miller's voice was hoarse. "Sarah, I just came to give you this." Sarah Lewis saw the book in Robert Miller's hand. It was Restoration Techniques for East Asian Porcelain, a book she had always wanted. She had searched for this book for a long time and had mentioned it to Robert Miller many times. Sarah Lewis pursed her lips, looked up, and met Robert Miller's gaze. The man's eyes held a look of eager anticipation, as if he already envisioned her being moved to tears. Sarah Lewis couldn't help but chuckle. She spoke faintly, "Thank you, but I don't need it. The British Museum has a copy." Robert Miller's expression froze. He parted his lips as if to say something, but Sarah Lewis's phone rang first. It was David Hayes calling, asking what she wanted for dinner that night. "Anything is fine, as long as you make it." Sarah Lewis smiled unconsciously, her tone and demeanor more relaxed than Robert Miller had ever seen. After she hung up, Robert Miller couldn't help but ask, "What do you like about him?" "Everything." That single word pierced Robert Miller's heart deeply. "Why?" "There's no why, Robert Miller. When I love someone, I love them truly. And when I don't love someone, I truly don't." Hearing those words, Robert Miller became even more frantic. He tightly grabbed Sarah Lewis's hand. "No, Sarah, you're just angry with me. You don't want to forgive me. You can hit me, curse at me. I was a jerk before. I wronged you. But please don't deny our past, okay?" "Past?" Hearing that word, Sarah Lewis's brows furrowed. She looked up at Robert Miller. "Robert Miller, do you remember why we got married?" Robert Miller's expression froze, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Seeing that he didn't speak, Sarah Lewis continued, "If you won't say it, I will. You were in love with Chloe Miller, but because of your nominal relationship, you couldn't be openly together. So you and Chloe Miller conspired to marry me as a shield. You say I'm denying our past? That's laughable. Between you and me, was there ever a past?" Robert Miller parted his lips, wanting to explain, but every word Sarah Lewis spoke was true, and he had no defense. Honestly, from the day you showed up, I wondered why you would come looking for me. Didn't my leaving fulfill your wishes? It wasn't until I recently learned what happened between you and Chloe Miller after I left. Robert Miller. What exactly do you see me as? A dispensable pet, available whenever you call? Chloe Miller didn't want you anymore, and now you're bothering me again. Is this what you call love? If it is, then I just want to say, your love is truly cheap. Sarah Lewis had kept these words to herself before, but Robert Miller's constant intrusion into her life had become unbearable. I'm sorry, Sarah, I was wrong. Robert Miller held her hand tightly, meeting her icy gaze. His heart sank into the abyss at that moment. Everything in the past became past the moment I decided to divorce you. I can't bring myself to say I've moved on or forgiven, but I can't forgive you, nor Chloe Miller. So please, stay out of my life, and don't bother me anymore. With the last words spoken, Sarah Lewis stood up and turned to leave without hesitation. Robert Miller watched her go, unable to stop her. This was the first time Sarah Lewis had spoken to him about these things so calmly. Before, he had thought her filing for divorce, coming to the UK, and treating him coldly were all because she was angry with him, but still loved him deep down. Only at this moment, when she spoke these words without any emotional fluctuation, did he realize that she had stopped loving him a long time ago. Thinking this, Robert Miller's heart ached more and more. He had to accept the truth. He had lost her long ago. After that day, Sarah Lewis didn't see Robert Miller again for a long time. She assumed he had completely given up and returned to his country, and she put the matter out of her mind. Her relationship with David Hayes grew stronger, whether at work or in life. They always had endless topics to talk about. One day, Sarah Lewis received a call from Emily Hayes, who invited her to dinner that evening because their parents were visiting. Sarah Lewis hadn't expected to meet David Hayes' parents so soon. She felt anxious and uneasy, distracted all afternoon. When work finished, she walked out of the British Museum and saw David Hayes standing by his car, seemingly having waited for her for a long time. He opened the passenger door, and Sarah Lewis got in. As the car drove, Sarah Lewis took the opportunity to ask many questions about Mr. and Mrs. Hayes' preferences. Seeing her so nervous, David Hayes smiled and held her hand. Don't be nervous, it's just dinner. What if your parents don't like me? As long as I like you, that's enough, David Hayes said carelessly. That's not right, don't worry. Emily has been praising you to my parents since your university days. They like you immensely, more than you know. None of the things you're worried about will happen. At dinner, Sarah Lewis met Mr. and Mrs. Hayes for the first time. Indeed, just as David Hayes had said, his parents were very fond of her. Their words filled with admiration and approval. By the end of the meal, Sarah Lewis's anxiety had completely disappeared. The feeling of being respected and genuinely cared for was completely different from how she felt when she was about to marry Robert Miller. As Sarah Lewis thought of Robert Miller, she looked up and saw a familiar figure standing opposite her. It was Robert Miller. For a moment, Sarah Lewis even wondered if she was hallucinating. David Hayes followed her gaze and saw Robert Miller as well. He tightened his grip on her hand, his voice gentle. Don't pay attention to him. The warmth of his palm soothed Sarah Lewis's uneasy heart. She nodded. Right, don't pay attention to him. After dinner that evening, David Hayes took Sarah Lewis home. When they reached her doorstep, Sarah Lewis was about to open the door when a figure in the distance made her pause again. It was Robert Miller again. Sarah Lewis put a hand to her forehead, feeling a little helpless. Robert Miller, what exactly do you want? Sarah Lewis, I remembered everything you said last time. In the past, I didn't appreciate you. Now that I've found you again, I'll make amends. Sarah Lewis looked at him with exasperation. I made myself very clear before. You're in Chloe Miller's scheming. The child that was lost. Everything is irreparable. Robert Miller looked at her, lost for words. Sarah Lewis took advantage of this moment, opened the door, and went inside. She had said everything she needed to say. If Robert Miller insisted on being so persistent, that was his choice, and it had nothing to do with her. Over the following period, Sarah Lewis dedicated most of her time to work. She had become accustomed to Robert Miller's frequent appearances and no longer found them surprising. However, Sarah Lewis hadn't anticipated that the constant intrusions into her life wouldn't just come from Robert Miller, but also from Chloe Miller, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. Her reunion with Chloe Miller occurred one afternoon. She was queuing for coffee at the coffee shop opposite the museum when a familiar voice spoke. The same as hers, one iced Americano. Sarah Lewis's head shot up instantly when she saw who was standing in front of her. Her gaze immediately turned cold. After getting her coffee, she turned to leave, but Chloe Miller grabbed her hand. Long time no see. Sarah. Sarah Lewis looked at her with icy eyes, finding it hard to believe that Chloe Miller could smile and talk to her so composedly. Sit down and chat. Sarah Lewis refused without a second thought. I have nothing to talk about with you. Chloe Miller blinked, showing no intention of letting go. To leave quickly, Sarah Lewis had no choice but to agree. The two walked to a table by the window. What do you want to talk about? Sitting opposite each other, Sarah Lewis suppressed her discomfort and spoke with forced patience. My Uncle Robert is permanently stationed at the branch company in the UK now. Sarah Lewis was somewhat surprised. She knew Robert Miller had been staying in the UK, but she hadn't expected that he planned to remain at the UK branch indefinitely. Sarah Lewis didn't speak. Chloe Miller pursed her lips. Do you know how happy I was when I heard that news? I thought he came to the UK for me. Every day I waited for him to find me. But in the end, the news I got was that he had been by your side all along. At this point, Chloe Miller suddenly laughed to herself. It's really funny. He didn't go looking for me. He came looking for you. Sarah Lewis gazed at Chloe Miller quietly. What are you trying to say? What am I trying to say? I just don't understand why you let him find you after you left. Why didn't you just disappear forever? Where I go is my choice. As for him coming to find me, that's Robert Miller's decision. I can't control his thoughts, but you can, after all. He loves you so much. Sarah Lewis deliberately emphasized the last sentence, having been close friends with Chloe Miller for years. How could she not hear the sarcasm in her words? Sarah Lewis, do you think because he's paying attention to you now, you have the right to mock me? Don't forget that the only reason you met him and married him is because of me. Sarah Lewis looked at Chloe Miller with an almost indifferent attitude. Even now, do you still think I should thank you? Chloe Miller's voice was full of disdain. Isn't that so? If it weren't for me, you'd be all alone. You wouldn't have had the chance to meet my Uncle Robert, let alone marry into a wealthy family. You should thank me for letting you be Mrs. Miller for so many years. Sarah Lewis smiled, not letting Chloe Miller's words affect her too much really. To call exploiting and deceiving someone doing them a favor. Chloe Miller, you truly surprise me. I wish I had realized this earlier. If I had, I think I would have steered clear of you from the very beginning. Chloe Miller clenched her fists tightly, her lips turning white from the force. Don't make yourself out to be so innocent. If you hadn't been greedy for my Uncle Robert's charm, why would you have married him? Sarah Lewis, I'm curious. What kind of shameless tactics did you use to make my Uncle Robert chase you all the way to the UK? You should ask yourself that. Chloe Miller was choked by the retort. Only then did she realize that the current Sarah Lewis was no longer the gentle and thoughtful person she used to be. The Sarah Lewis now was sharp and indifferent. No matter what methods you use, I'm telling you, Uncle Robert can only be mine. He's just angry with me now. That's why he's trying to come back to you. He doesn't love you at all, so you'd better stay away from him. Facing such a threatening remark, Sarah Lewis didn't get angry. If you're so confident about Robert Miller, why did you come looking for me today? I just came to remind you. No, you didn't come to remind me. You came to be obnoxious. Sarah Lewis's words were concise and hit the mark. Chloe Miller's face instantly turned pale, her fingers trembling. What did you say? Having endured for so long, Sarah Lewis couldn't hold back any longer. She looked at Chloe Miller, her eyes cold. Do you think liking your own uncle, using your friend, getting what you wanted and then abandoning it, and now regretting it after losing it, do you think these things are something to be proud of? The things she had done were spoken by Sarah Lewis so openly, and Chloe Miller's face turned from red to white. Her heart was filled with pain and anger. She raised her hand to slap Sarah Lewis across the face, but before her hand could land, it was stopped midway. Let go, before Chloe Miller could finish. She turned her head and saw Robert Miller with cold eyes. Uncle Robert. Robert Miller shook off her hand, his gaze colder than ever. What are you doing? Before Chloe Miller could explain, Robert Miller cut her off coldly. You shouldn't be here. Leave now. Chloe Miller was stunned by his indifferent attitude. Uncle Robert, we haven't seen each other in a long time. Why are you so cold to me? Don't you miss me? You chose to go abroad yourself. Do I need to miss you? From now on, your matters have nothing to do with me. Don't appear in front of me again. With that, Robert Miller looked at Sarah Lewis. Let's go. Before Sarah Lewis could answer, Chloe Miller grabbed Robert Miller's hand. Uncle Robert, how can you be like this? This is Sarah Lewis, the person you used to despise the most. How can you be so gentle to her now? Robert Miller's voice was chilling. You said it yourself, that was in the past. Now I see clearly. She is the one I love most. No, no. Chloe Miller shook her head repeatedly, unwilling to accept the truth. How can you love her? The person you love should be me. You can't do this to me, Uncle Robert. Robert Miller's deep, unfathomable eyes were full of coldness. I can't do this to you. Chloe Miller, you abandoned me and went abroad when I was filled with anticipation. And you still expect me to love you as I did before? I only regret that I was wrong from the start, that I didn't see your materialistic nature. Sarah Lewis had no desire to watch them argue. She bent down, picked up her bag, and prepared to leave. Just as Robert Miller was about to chase after her, an arm blocked his path. It was David Hayes. Seeing David Hayes, a smile immediately appeared on Sarah Lewis's face. You're here. David Hayes gave her a reassuring look, then turned to Robert Miller, his voice cold. Mr. Miller, you should attend your own affairs first. With that, David Hayes took Sarah Lewis's hand and walked towards the exit of the coffee shop. I'm sorry I'm late, David Hayes said, holding Sarah Lewis tightly in the car, his words full of apology. He couldn't restrain his emotions any longer. Sarah Lewis shook her head. You're not late. You're right on time. David Hayes held her even tighter. Sarah, let's get engaged first. Engaged? Sarah Lewis was surprised, not expecting David Hayes to suggest getting engaged. Yes, let's get engaged first. Although I know you've moved on from Robert Miller, seeing him appear frequently in front of you, I can't control my emotions. I'm afraid that he might do something detrimental to you one day. Perhaps our engagement will make him finally give up completely. Sarah Lewis thought about it and felt that David Hayes made sense. She was sincere towards David Hayes, and David Hayes was sincere towards her. Getting engaged now felt like a natural progression for them. Okay, then let's get engaged. Having decided to hold an engagement ceremony, Sarah Lewis focused her attention on the preparations. Although there were many things to arrange for the engagement, with the Hayes family involved, she didn't have much to worry about. Even though the timing was a bit rushed, the Hayes family had prepared thoroughly. One day, Sarah Lewis received a call from Emily Hayes, and they arranged to go try on engagement dresses that evening. She stood outside the museum, ready to hail a taxi. A car suddenly stopped in front of her. She heard the sound and looked up, but before she could see who it was, a large hand covered her mouth and nose. The next second, a familiar voice sounded in her ear. Don't be afraid, Sarah, it's me. I'm taking you home. Robert Miller, the man who was once elegant and distinguished, now had a look of madness in his eyes. Sarah Lewis struggled, trying to call for help, but her vision gradually blurred. In her last moments of consciousness, she felt herself being lifted and put into a car. After an unknown amount of time, Sarah Lewis woke up again. Her wrists were locked to the car door handle with cold handcuffs. Seeing her awake, Robert Miller spoke softly, his voice gentle, yet sending a chill down her spine. You're awake? Go back to sleep for a while. We'll be at the airport soon. Robert Miller, are you insane? Sarah Lewis's voice trembled with fear. Let me go. David Hayes will definitely call the police when he finds out I'm missing. Hearing David Hayes's name, Robert Miller's fingers tightened fiercely on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. David Hayes? That bastard you're about to get engaged to? How dare he have you? You can only be mine. Only then did Sarah Lewis realize that the reason for Robert Miller's madness was the news of her engagement to David Hayes. She tried to keep her voice steady. Robert Miller, we've been divorced for a long time. Let's both move on, okay? Robert Miller's emotions became extremely agitated. No, I admit I made many mistakes in the past, that I was blind and overlooked your love. But I've woken up now. Why can't you just give me one chance? Why are you going to get engaged to that man? Sarah Lewis's hands trembled with fear. She realized that Robert Miller in front of her had completely lost his mind. She forced herself to stay calm. In this situation, she had to find a way to escape on her own. The car continued to drive. Sarah Lewis suddenly said, I need to use the restroom. Robert Miller glanced at her. Hold it in. Sarah Lewis deliberately let her voice crack with a sob. I can't hold it in. Robert Miller, please. Just let me go to the restroom, okay? Robert Miller looked her over and stopped the car at the next service area. Don't try anything funny. Sarah Lewis nodded. her eyes scanning the surroundings for any chance to call for help. But there was no one around. She had no opportunity to escape. The car got back onto the highway. Sarah Lewis looked at Robert Miller and tried to speak again. Robert Miller, can we talk? What you're doing will only ruin yourself. Robert Miller's voice was perfectly calm. There's nothing left to talk about. When we get back to our country, you'll understand that all of this was worth it. You'll fall in love with me again, just like before. Sarah Lewis closed her eyes, feeling utterly desperate. Suddenly, Robert Miller's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, hung up immediately, and turned the phone off. Whose call was that? It doesn't matter. The car continued to drive. Sarah Lewis became increasingly familiar with the scenery until the car stopped outside her apartment. Where's your passport? Only then did Sarah Lewis understand that Robert Miller had driven back to retrieve her passport. It's in the drawer in my bedroom. She gave him the wrong location to buy herself some time. Robert Miller found the key to her apartment on her. He looked up at her, his eyes dangerous. I'll be right back down. Be a good girl and wait here for me. With that, he stuck a piece of tape over her mouth, locked the car door, and left. Sarah Lewis used the time he was upstairs to desperately look for a way to escape, but before she could think of anything, Robert Miller returned. He held her passport in his hand, his eyes full of joy. Sarah, we're going back now. When we get there, we'll register our marriage, and you'll be Mrs. Miller again soon. Sarah Lewis looked at the completely insane Robert Miller. Her gaze shifted, and she spoke again, her voice becoming gentle. Robert Miller, I've thought about it. Maybe you're right. Things with David Hayes moved too quickly. Robert Miller was stunned. He hadn't expected her to say such a thing. He stared at her blankly. Sarah Lewis took a deep breath and spoke again. Just as you said, the feelings we had for so many years aren't something you can just forget. You're still the only one in my heart. In fact, I've been thinking about you this whole time too. Really? You've finally come to your senses? Robert Miller's eyes lit up instantly. He grabbed Sarah Lewis's hand, his emotions becoming very agitated. Sarah Lewis nodded, trying her best to keep her expression from showing any hint of deceit. But Robert Miller, kidnapping is a serious crime. Can't we start over properly? Take me home first, and we can talk things through. After she finished speaking, the smile on Robert Miller's face vanished. His eyes turned cold again. No, Sarah Lewis, you're lying to me. As soon as I let you go, you'll call the police. We have to leave now. Everything will be fine once we're back home. Sarah Lewis's heart sank, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't expected Robert Miller to realize so quickly. The car drove onto the airport highway. Sarah Lewis's heart was in her throat. So, could she not change anything? Was she still going to be taken back by Robert Miller? Suddenly, a horn sounded from behind. A black SUV approached them at an alarming speed. The window rolled down. Sarah Lewis saw David Hayes' face, cold with anger and worry. Sarah Lewis was overjoyed. It was David Hayes. He had come to rescue her. Sarah, protect yourself. David Hayes shouted her name, and after instructing her, his SUV slammed into the back of Robert Miller's car. The next second, Robert Miller's car spun out of control. The airbags deployed. The impact made Sarah Lewis's vision go black, but Robert Miller was far more severely injured than she was. His face was covered in blood, his eyes closed tightly. He appeared to have lost consciousness. David Hayes helped Sarah Lewis out of the car and held her tightly in his arms. It's okay now. It's okay. He comforted Sarah Lewis repeatedly. However, just then, Robert Miller, who had been unconscious, woke up again. He started the engine, and the car surged towards Sarah Lewis and David Hayes like an arrow released from a bowstring. David Hayes immediately pulled Sarah Lewis and dove towards the roadside. The car roared past, then crashed into the median barrier, rolling over several times before finally coming to rest upside down in the middle of the road. Police sirens and ambulance sirens wailed. When Robert Miller was pulled from the wreckage by rescue workers, his legs were a bloody mess. David Hayes quickly covered Sarah Lewis's eyes. Don't look. Sarah Lewis closed her eyes. The anxiety that had been weighing on her heart finally dissipated at this moment. Robert Miller survived, but with a high-level amputation, he would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Upon hearing about Robert Miller's condition, Chloe Miller came to Sarah Lewis's place and made a huge scene, claiming that Sarah Lewis was responsible for everything that happened to Robert Miller. David Hayes immediately ordered the security guards to drag her away and instructed them never to let Chloe Miller appear near the area again. As for the incident that day, Sarah Lewis saw it as an accident entirely brought upon himself by Robert Miller, having nothing to do with her. 1 month later, Sarah Lewis and David Hayes held their engagement ceremony as planned. Many guests attended the ceremony, and every single person's face showed genuine well wishes. David Hayes held Sarah Lewis tightly in his arms from this moment on. Every day in the future would be a new chapter in their beautiful story.